At my sister's engagement dinner, Mom introduced me to the groom's family. This is our other daughter, cleans houses for a living. Dad added, we've given up on her. The groom's mother tilted her head, stared at me, and whispered, wait, you're the woman who... She stopped. The entire table went dead silent. My mom's face turned white. I'm Renee. I'm 34 years old. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. I drive a black Audi Q7. I have a standing Friday lunch with my business partner, Dana, and on Sunday mornings I make coffee, sit on my back porch, and read actual physical newspapers because I find something grounding about ink on paper. None of that matters to this story. What matters is that for 31 years, my mother introduced me to people as her other daughter. Not her daughter, not her eldest, her other daughter. The phrasing was deliberate. It created distance while maintaining plausible deniability. She was technically acknowledging my existence. She was just doing it the way you acknowledge a scratch on your car. Something you're aware of, something you live with, something you'd rather not explain. And for 31 years, I let her. This is the story of the night that ended. But to understand that night, to really understand what it meant when Carol Hargrove set her phone on the table and said what she said, you need to understand where I came from. You need to understand Delwood, Ohio, and Janet Calloway, and what it felt like to grow up as the supporting character in someone else's family. So let me take you back. Delwood is the kind of town that sounds charming when you describe it to people who don't live there. 22,000 people. A main street with a hardware store and 2 diners and a barbershop that's been in the same family for 4 decades. A county fair every August. A high school football team the whole town shuts down for on Friday nights. Church on Sunday. Casseroles when someone dies. My parents, Janet and Frank Calloway, were well regarded in Delwood. Janet volunteered at the elementary school library every Tuesday and Thursday for 12 years. Frank coached Little League for 6 seasons and was the kind of man who remembered every kid's name years later and asked about them by name when he ran into their parents at the grocery store. They were good people in the ways that Delwood measured goodness. Reliable, present, respectable. They had a very specific vision for what a successful life looked like, and they had put all of that vision into my sister Becca, Rebecca Ann Calloway, 3 years younger than me. Blonde, organized, relentlessly competent in the ways that made adults nod approvingly. She made honor roll every semester from 6th grade onward. She ran student council. She got a partial scholarship to Ohio State. She joined a sorority, maintained a 3.7 GPA, graduated in 4 years, and walked into a marketing coordinator position at a mid-sized firm in Columbus 6 weeks after commencement. My mother framed her degree, not a copy, the actual diploma. Gold frame, glass front, center wall of the living room, positioned so you'd see it the moment you walked in through the front door. I don't begrudge Becca any of it. I want to say that clearly and mean it, because this story is not about Becca. Becca worked hard. Becca made choices that made sense. Becca built the life our parents imagined, and she built it genuinely, not performatively. We are close now in a way we weren't when we were younger, and that closeness is real. But growing up, the contrast between us was something my parents narrated constantly, often without seeming to notice they were doing it. Becca's report card would come home, and my mother would put it on the refrigerator with a magnet and call my grandmother. My report card, which was fine, not exceptional but fine, would get a brief glance and a "good job, honey," before she moved on to asking what I wanted for dinner. Small things accumulate. They become the architecture of how you understand your place in the world. And my place, I understood early, was adjacent. I was there. I was cared for. But I was not the point of the story. I was scenery. I stopped trying to be what they wanted somewhere around age 14. Not dramatically, I just quietly redirected. I read constantly. I got a job at a bakery at 15 for the relief of being somewhere my usefulness was measured in something concrete. You showed up, you did the work, you got paid. The transaction was clean and honest. I liked that. I was a decent student, not honor roll, not the kind of grades that got mentioned at the dinner table in admiring tones. But I passed everything, genuinely understood most of what they taught me, and graduated from Delwood High in the middle of my class without drama or distinction, which felt about right. College was assumed. My parents sat me down and explained logistics, SAT dates, community college catalogs. I said I wanted to go to Columbus Community first and figure out what I actually wanted before spending money on a 4-year degree. My mother nodded. My father said that made sense. Neither mentioned it again in the way you stop mentioning a plan you've mentally filed under temporary. I enrolled. I took classes. I did okay. By November, I understood with complete clarity that nothing about the structure of what I was doing connected to anything I actually wanted. Not the classes, not the campus, not the outcome I was being aimed toward. I withdrew before the spring semester. I told my parents over dinner. My mother put down her fork. My father stared at a spot on the tablecloth for a long moment and then said very quietly that he hoped I understood what I was doing. I said I did. My mother said she just didn't understand what the plan was. I told her I was going to start a cleaning business. There was a silence that lasted probably 4 seconds but felt significantly longer. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at me. Then he picked his fork back up and said, "Well, you'll figure it out," in the tone of voice people use when they've already concluded you won't. That was the moment things shifted in my family. Not dramatically, not with a fight, just a quiet reclassification. Becca was the plan. I was the uncertainty. And in Delwood, Ohio, uncertainty was its own kind of failure. I started with what I had, which wasn't much. I had $400 in a savings account from the bakery job and from babysitting, and from a brief, uninspiring stint as a cashier at the hardware store on Main Street. I had a used Honda Civic that my dad had bought me when I turned 17. I had a phone, a laptop, and a genuine willingness to work in ways that most people my age found unappealing. I went to the dollar store and bought rubber gloves, sponges, a scrub brush, and 3 different cleaning products. I went went to the grocery store and bought a mop head and a bucket. I printed business cards at the library for $12. Callaway Cleaning, Renee Callaway, phone number, email address, and I put them up on bulletin boards at the laundromat and the coffee shop and the community center. 2 weeks later, a woman named Patricia Donovan called me. She was 67, recently widowed, and overwhelmed by a 4-bedroom house she'd kept immaculate for decades with her husband but couldn't manage alone. She was embarrassed about the state of it. I could hear that in her voice on the phone, the way she apologized before she even told me what she needed. I went on a Thursday morning. The house was not catastrophically dirty. It was the kind of dirty that accumulates when someone is grieving and exhausted and doing their best with limited bandwidth. Dishes in the sink, dust on the baseboards, a bathroom that hadn't been properly scrubbed in maybe 6 weeks. I spent 4 hours. I cleaned everything. I got on my hands and knees and did the grout in her kitchen with a toothbrush. I cleaned behind the refrigerator. I washed her windows inside and out. When I was done, I walked through the house with her, and she stood in her kitchen with her hand over her mouth and cried, not dramatically, just quietly, the way people cry when something small but significant has been returned to them. She paid me $60. She called me again 2 weeks later. She recommended me to her neighbor. That neighbor recommended me to her book club. By spring, I had 7 regular clients. I'm not going to pretend those early years were comfortable. They weren't. I was 21 years old cleaning strangers' bathrooms while my college friends posted about orientation week and dorm decorating. There is a specific kind of loneliness in doing work that your own family has decided to be embarrassed about. You can't call home and share a good day. You can't mention a new client or a referral or the fact that you just figured out a scheduling system that saves you 2 hours a week, because you know before you dial what you'll get. A pause, a redirect, a subject change toward Becca. My mother developed a phrase for when people asked about me. She'd pause and say, "Renee is finding her path." Slight downward inflection, not cruel in public, just quietly, consistently clear that my path was not the path. My father was quieter about it. He was a man who expressed disappointment through absence rather than commentary. He stopped asking about my work almost immediately after I started. Not because he was cruel, but because he'd made a determination and didn't see the point in ongoing investigation. He was pleasant to me at family dinners. He asked about my health, my car, whether I was eating enough. He never once asked about the business. I called home on Sunday evenings for the first 2 years. My mother would answer. We'd talk for 10 or 15 minutes, and she would give me the Becca update, how the job was going, what her boyfriend was like, whether she was thinking about getting an apartment. I would listen and ask appropriate questions, and then we would hang up and I would sit for a moment in my apartment, which by that point was a 1-bedroom above a dry cleaner in the north part of Columbus. And I would feel the specific weight of being known by the people who should know you best in a version of yourself that is 12 years out of date and getting further away every week. In year 3, I hired my first employee. Her name was Carla Mendez. She was 26, had 2 kids, and had been cleaning houses on her own for 3 years and was ready to join something more stable. I couldn't afford to pay her what she was worth, but I could afford to pay her more than she was making alone. And I could offer her a consistent schedule and a route, which mattered more than rate when you have kids and need to plan your week. Carla is still with me. She runs the Columbus North Division now. She bought a house last year. I cried in my car when she texted me a photo of the front door. But in year 3, she was just the first person who believed in what I was building enough to tie their income to it. That matters. When someone trusts you with their livelihood, something changes in how you think about what you're doing. It stops being a thing you're trying and becomes a thing you're responsible for. That shift was good for me. It made me more serious, more structured, more committed to building something that would hold. I got my business license that fall, framed it, hung it in my apartment above my desk, called my mother to tell her. She said, "Oh, that's great, honey. Did I tell you Becca got promoted? She's running the whole social media side now. Her boss says she's one of the best they've ever had." I said that was great. We talked for 7 more minutes. We hung up. I went back to my desk and looked at the license, and I thought, okay, you keep going. You keep building. You let the work be the answer. By year 5, Callaway Cleaning had 12 employees, 4 service vehicles, and a monthly revenue that would have stunned my parents if they'd known it, which they didn't because they never asked. I had moved into a real office by then. Small, shared space in a business center on the east side, but a real address, a real lease with my name on it. I had a bookkeeper named Ron who came in twice a month and kept my numbers honest and told me, the first time he reviewed my books, that I was running a tighter operation than most of his clients who'd been in business 3 times as long. I called home to tell them about the office. My mother said she was in the middle of something. She said she'd call back. She called back 4 days later and asked if I'd seen the news story about the storm in our county. We talked about the storm for 8 minutes. The office never came up. I don't tell that story to generate sympathy. I tell it because the pattern matters. The pattern is the point. It wasn't one dismissal. It was 100 of them. Quiet and consistent over the course of a decade, adding up to a very clear message. What you're building doesn't register. It doesn't count. It's not the kind of thing we track. And I learned somewhere in the middle of year 5 that the only healthy response to that message was to stop sending them updates. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was just a gradual, necessary withdrawal from the habit of seeking validation from people who had made it abundantly clear they weren't going to provide it. I stopped calling on Sundays. I went to shorter calls on holidays. I showed up at Thanksgiving and Christmas with a dish I'd cooked, participated in the conversation, and drove home on Sunday and got back to work. My mother, I should say, was not cold to me at family dinners. She was warm even. She asked about my health and my apartment and whether I was dating anyone. She was performing the role of involved parent with reasonable competence, as long as you didn't look too closely at what was missing. What was missing was curiosity. She was not curious about my life. She was curious about whether whether my life looked okay, whether she could accurately report to her church friends that her other daughter was doing fine, nothing to worry about. She was managing a narrative, not a relationship. Year 7 is when Dana came in, and Dana is important. Dana Marsh was 31 when I hired her. She had a degree in business administration, had spent 3 years at a commercial cleaning company in Cincinnati that went bankrupt, and had been running a small residential operation on her own for 2 years. She answered my job posting for an operations manager. I interviewed her on a Tuesday. She came in with a folder containing a 3-page analysis of my route structure she'd prepared without being asked. Inefficiencies identified, solutions proposed. I hired her on the spot. Dana is 6 years older than me, organized in a way that borders on compulsive and constitutionally unable to accept a process that hasn't been optimized. She is also one of the best people I have ever known. She grew up in Cleveland. Her parents ran a small restaurant, and she came up understanding that work is not something you do until you can afford to stop. Work is how you build things. Work is how you make something out of nothing. She and I understood each other immediately, which is not something I can say about many people. Within a year of Dana joining, we had restructured the entire operation. Routes were optimized. Employee scheduling was systematized. We added commercial accounts, small offices, a dental practice, an urgent care clinic. We moved into a larger office. We hired an HR person on a part-time basis to handle onboarding and compliance. And then Dana said the thing that changed everything. We were sitting in the office on a Wednesday evening in late fall, both of us reviewing a contract proposal for a mid-sized property management group. And Dana looked up and said, "We should be franchising this." I looked at her. "Think about it," she said. "Our systems are tight. Our quality control is documented. Our training process works. We have a replicable model. We should be licensing it." I had thought about it, abstractly, the way you think about things that feel too large to be real. But hearing Dana say it, Dana, who didn't say things speculatively, Dana who said things when she had already thought them through, made it feel like a real variable rather than a daydream. We spent 6 months planning with a franchise consultant, refined our documentation and financials, and launched the franchise program in year 9. By year 10, we had 4 locations outside Columbus: Dayton, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Indianapolis. By year 11, we were in Michigan. Year 12 brought us to Pittsburgh and Louisville. 14 states as it stands today. 87 employees across the corporate entity alone, not counting franchise staff. My parents, as far as I knew, saw none of it. I later found out from Becca that my mother had come across a regional newsletter item about our franchise expansion at some point and described it to Becca at lunch as, "Renee's in some little business newsletter. I guess the cleaning company is expanding." Then changed the subject. The Hartwell building came up in conversation with Dana on a Thursday in March, almost exactly 2 years before Becca's engagement dinner. We were looking for a central operations hub. Our Columbus office was too small for the corporate team we'd built, and we needed a facility with enough square footage to house our rep operations, equipment storage, fleet management, and administrative staff in one location. We'd been looking at commercial properties for 8 months without finding the right combination of size, price, and infrastructure. Dana found the Hartwell building through a broker in Columbus, former warehouse, industrial zoning, Route 9 corridor, well outside the downtown premium pricing zone. The building was sound. A structural engineer's report confirmed it, but it had been sitting vacant for 4 years, and the price reflected that. The owners wanted to move it and were willing to deal. The number we arrived at after 2 weeks of negotiation was $12 million. I want to be precise about that figure because it matters to what comes later. $12 million. For a 34-year-old woman who started with a bucket and a $400 savings account, $12 million for a physical building was the kind of number that should have been incomprehensible. It was not incomprehensible. We had the capital, the financing structure, and the business case. Dana had run the projections 6 ways. Our commercial banker signed off without hesitation. We closed on a Friday in April. Dana and I stood outside the building afterward in the parking lot and didn't say anything for probably 30 seconds. Then she said, "We own a warehouse," in a tone that was trying to be casual and not quite making it. I laughed. She laughed. We went and got dinner and split a bottle of wine, and I drove home at 9:30 and sat in my living room and felt, for the first time in years, the specific quiet that comes when something you work toward for a long time becomes real. I did not call my parents, not because I was making a point, simply because I had learned over 14 years that calling my parents to share good news produced a specific, predictable result that was indistinguishable from calling them to report the weather. The sale of the Hartwell building made the Columbus Business First Journal 5 days later. A brief item in the commercial real estate transaction section: Callaway Property Solutions LLC acquires former Hartwell industrial property, Route 9 corridor, for 12.1 hours. 3 months later, a journalist named Sarah Vance from Columbus Monthly called Dana's office line. Sarah was doing a feature piece on women-owned businesses in central Ohio that had scaled past the startup phase. We agreed to be profiled. The piece ran in the November issue. 4 pages, 2 photos, one of Dana and me inside the renovated Hartwell building in front of our new fleet of vehicles, and one of me at my desk with the original framed business license visible on the wall behind me. The headline was "From Mops to Millions," which I tried to talk Sarah out of and failed. The subhead was better: How Renee Callaway and Dana Marsh built a 14-state cleaning empire by refusing to be overlooked. The article covered the founding, the franchise expansion, the Hartwell acquisition, our team culture, our numbers. It quoted me on what it felt like to build something that people in your own life had been dismissive of. I said, "I stopped waiting for permission a long time ago. The work didn't need permission. It just needed me to keep showing up." Sarah said it was her favorite quote from any interview that year. She put it in the full quote box, large type, centered on the second page of the spread. My mother, Tyler, as far as I knew, did not read Columbus Monthly. Carol Hargrove, it turned out, read everything. Becca called me on a Tuesday evening in late August to tell me she was engaged. I was at my desk finishing a franchise renewal review when my phone lit up with her name. We spoke once or twice a month by that point. More than we used to, less than I would have liked. She had been seeing Tyler Hargrove for 2 years, and I'd met him twice, once at Christmas and once at a birthday dinner for our father, and I liked him. He was quieter than Becca, which balanced her. He listened when people talked. He didn't try to perform. He asked me last night, she said, on the back porch. He made dinner. He was so nervous he burned the rice and tried to pretend he meant to. I laughed. What did you say? I said yes, eventually. I made him sweat for about 30 seconds first. Good. We talked for an hour. It was one of the better conversations we'd had. She sounded genuinely happy. The kind of happy that is quiet and settled rather than loud and anxious. I told her I was so glad for her. I meant it completely. She mentioned that Tyler's mother, Carol Hargrove, was someone I should know about. She's smart, Becca said. Like, actually smart. She runs a consulting firm, commercial real estate. She kind of sees through everything immediately, which is a little terrifying, honestly, but also you'd like her. I filed that away without knowing why. The engagement dinner was set for a Saturday in October at Carver's, which was the nicest restaurant Delwood had, which is a sentence that requires some context. Carver's had white tablecloths and a wine list and a private dining room that held about 30 people. For Delwood, this was as formal as it got. My mother had clearly been planning it for some time because the invitation arrived, which was an actual printed card in an envelope, before Becca had even called to tell me about it personally. I RSVP'd yes immediately. I was not going to miss Becca's engagement dinner regardless of how it was going to feel to sit at that table. In the week before the dinner, my mother called me twice. The first call was logistical. What time I was arriving, whether I had dietary restrictions she should mention to the kitchen. The second call was something else. I just want to mention, she said, and I could hear the careful construction of the sentence, that Tyler's family is very established. His mother runs quite a large firm. They're Columbus people, not Delwood people. Okay, I said. I just want everyone to be comfortable, to have a nice evening. That's what I want too. A pause. I know you have your business, but I'd prefer if the conversation didn't get too focused on that. It's Becca's night. I want it to be about her and Tyler. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment. Put it back. Mom, I'm not planning to spend the dinner giving a business presentation. I just mean, you know how you can get when people ask about work. Very into the details. I let that sit. I'll behave, Mom. She laughed her hostess laugh, the one that wrapped everything in lightness to avoid accountability. I know you will, honey. I just want it to be perfect. You understand? I understood. I arrived at Carver's at 6:15. I had on a dark green dress, low heels, hair down. I looked presentable. I looked like someone who had somewhere to be. The private room was already half full. Round tables with floral centerpieces, the kind of setup that requires weeks of planning and looks effortless. Candles, soft background music. My mother was in the center of the room in a burgundy blazer she'd clearly bought for the occasion, animating a conversation with a couple I didn't recognize. She saw me come in. The animation paused for half a second. Then she smiled and said, "Oh, you made it," with the particular brightness she used when she was covering something other than delight. "Hi, Mom. There's a spot at that round table in the corner." She gestured toward a smaller satellite table near the window, away from the main long table where most of the guests were seating themselves. The main table is pretty full. I looked at the main table. There were open seats. There was a seat next to Becca with a handbag on it that I recognized as my mother's. I walked to the round table. A distant cousin I barely knew was already there, 2 glasses into something amber, talking to his phone. He nodded at me. I sat down. From the corner table, I could see the whole room. Tyler was across the space near the bar, talking with a group I took to be his family. Easy posture, shared laughter, the comfortable body language of people who know each other well. He caught my eye, broke away immediately, came over. "You must be Renee," he said. "Becca talks about you a lot. I'm really glad you're here." I thanked him. We shook hands. He was warm in the specific way that isn't performed. Eye contact, full attention, no angles. Before I could say more than 2 sentences, my mother materialized at his elbow. "Tyler, your uncle is looking for you. I think he just arrived from Dayton," and steered him gently away in the opposite direction. She didn't look at me. I watched her navigate the room for the next 30 minutes from my position at the corner table. She was performing in the truest sense, moving through the space, connecting guests, providing context, managing the flow of attention. She was good at it. She had practiced it her entire life. I watched her introduce Becca to Tyler's relatives. I watched her make a point of being photographed with Tyler's parents, Gary and Linda, who seemed genuinely happy to be there. I watched her scan the room periodically with the focused attention of someone checking that all the elements of a production were in place. When she scanned past my corner of the room, her eyes moved through me like I was a lamp. Carol Hargrove arrived at 6:45. I noticed her immediately, the way you notice people who carry a particular quality of attention. She walked in and looked at the whole room before she looked at any one part of it. Silver hair, structured jacket, the kind of posture that is less about formality and more about command. She went to Tyler, hugged him, held his face in her hands for a moment. She greeted Becca warmly. She shook hands with my mother, who was clearly deploying her highest tier social performance. The hand on the arm, the intimate lean, the laugh that meant she was delighted to be respected by someone who mattered. They seated Carol near the center of the main table, 2 seats from the head. I was at the round table in the corner with my distant cousin and eventually 2 elderly relatives from my father's side who spent the dinner talking exclusively to each other. Dinner began. The room filled with the noise of serving and conversation and my mother at full performance volume. I ate my salad and watched and felt the familiar, specific texture of being present in my family's life from a careful painful distance. It was not misery. I want to be honest about that. I had made peace with most of it over the years. It was more like a chronic ache than an acute pain, something you notice more in certain positions than others, something you've learned to work around. Then my mother stood up during the appetizers to do her first round of formal introductions, moving around the perimeter of the room to connect the Hargrove side with the Calloway side. She was, I will give her this, masterful at it. Names, context, connections, she wove them together gracefully. She got to me. And this, she said to Carol, with the small, self-deprecating smile she reserved for apologies she wouldn't name, this is our other daughter, Renee, a beat. She cleans houses for a living. It landed the way it always landed. Informational, tonally apologetic, efficient. And then my father, seated 3 chairs away, who had been buttering a roll without looking up, said, we've given up on her. He didn't say it meanly. That is somehow the part that hits hardest, even now. He wasn't trying to wound me. He had made a determination years ago, and he was reporting it. The way you'd report that a project had been discontinued. Factual. Finished. We've given up on her. 30 people in the room. I heard every syllable from 30 feet away. I put both hands in my lap, pressed my thumbnail into my palm, kept my face still. I had practice at this. What I didn't have practice at was what happened next. Carol Hargrove had been in the middle of a conversation with the woman seated to her left when my mother reached her with the introduction. She had turned politely, acknowledged me with a nod, given my mother the socially required responsive smile, and then she had looked at me, not in the pitying way that some of the other guests looked at me after my parents' commentary, not with the secondhand embarrassment of people who don't know how to handle witnessing small cruelties. She looked at me the way you look at something that has snagged your memory, focused, searching, slightly frowning, the way you look when a name is on the tip of your tongue. She was quiet for a moment, then she reached for her wine glass, sipped it slowly, and kept looking at me. I looked back. I didn't look away. I had spent a long time learning not to look away. The appetizers were cleared. The main course came. The room settled into its primary noise level. My father had moved on from his commentary about me with the ease of someone who hadn't said anything notable. My mother was deep in conversation with Gary Hargrove about something involving garden renovations. Becca was next to Tyler, laughing at something his younger brother had said, briefly, radiantly happy in the way that good news makes you for a window before the ordinary world reasserts itself. Then Carol set her fork down. She folded her napkin. She turned in her chair, not all the way toward my corner table, but enough. And she called across the room, clearly enough to carry, not loudly, but with the particular precision of someone who was done waiting for a quiet moment. Renee, what's the name of your company? The table conversations continued for a half second and then staggered. People looked toward Carol, then toward me. My mother was at Carol's elbow in what felt like an instant. Oh, Mrs. Hargrove, really? She's just starting out. You don't need to. Carol raised one hand. Small movement. Absolute. I asked Renee. My mother's mouth closed. I said, Calloway Cleaning Solutions. Carol's expression shifted. Something clicked. The frown of recognition smoothed out into something steadier, more certain. She reached for her bag and pulled out her phone without looking away from me. She typed something. The room had not fully quieted. People were still eating, still talking, but there was a current running through it now. The particular alertness of a room that has sensed something happening without knowing what yet. Tyler noticed. He'd been watching his mother since her hand had gone to her bag. He knew her tells. He straightened slightly in his seat. Carol's thumb moved on the screen, then stopped. She looked at the screen for a long moment. Her hand came up slowly and touched her lips. She looked at Tyler. She turned the phone toward him. He read it. His eyebrows went up by a fraction. He looked at me. He looked at his mother. He nodded once, very slightly. Carol put the phone down on the tablecloth in front of her. She looked at my mother. Then she looked at me. Then she began. Janet, she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quality of her tone was enough to pull the remaining side conversations to a close. You introduced your daughter as someone who cleans houses. My mother laughed lightly. Well, she does. She has her little... I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, Carol said. You said she cleans houses. Yes. My mother's smile was holding, but her eyes were reading the room, trying to understand the direction of something she'd lost track of. Carol looked at me. Calloway Cleaning Solutions, she said. Not a question. Confirming. Yes, I said. Carol looked back at my mother. She picked up her phone and set it, screen up, at the center of the table. On the screen was the Columbus Business First Journal listing. Calloway Property Solutions LLC acquires former Hartwell Industrial Property, Route 9 Corridor, 12 Don 1 Mim. Your daughter, Carol said, doesn't clean houses, Janet. She let that sit for 2 full seconds. She owns them. The silence that followed was not a polite pause. It was the sound of 30 people recalculating simultaneously. My father's bourbon glass came down hard enough to rattle his plate. My mother made a sound that was not a word. Becca's hand went to her mouth. Carol was not finished. She looked at me steadily, and something in her expression was both warm and careful. The look of someone who understands they are disrupting a room, but has decided the disruption is necessary. I read the Columbus Monthly piece in November, she said. The profile. 14 states, 87 employees, the franchise program. She paused. The Hartwell acquisition made business first. I track commercial real estate transactions in the Route 9 corridor because 3 of my firm's clients have properties there. She folded her hands. When Janet introduced you this evening, I thought I recognized you. I wasn't certain until you said the company name. The room was completely still. I've been in commercial real estate consulting for 22 years, Carol said. I don't make a habit of speaking this way at social occasions. A brief pause. I'm speaking now because I watched this family spend the last hour treating their daughter like a footnote, and I'm not able to sit quietly while that happens when I know what I know. My mother had gone very pale. Mrs. Hargrove, she started. Janet. Carol's voice was not unkind. It was simply perfectly exact. 2 minutes ago, you told this table her business was a cleaning operation. You used a tone that made it very clear you thought that was something to be managed around. I understand you may not have known the full scope of what she's built. A pause. But I think you did know it was something. And you chose this framing anyway. The room had the texture of a held breath. My father had not said a word since his glass hit the table. He was looking at a spot on the linen where the bourbon had spilled. Then there was a sound, a muted scrape on the hardwood floor. 3 seats down from Carol, someone was sliding their chair back. Then another person, the Harrisons, distant friends of my parents who had been laughing at every light moment all evening, were standing up, gathering their things, exchanging the particular quiet looks of people making a decision. I think we've got a long drive, Bill Harrison said to no one in particular. His wife was already reaching for her coat. They left. And then, something I did not expect. My mother's closest friend from church, Lauren Stafford, who had been seated 3 chairs from my mother, picked up her wine glass and moved it 3 seats to the left. She didn't say anything. She just moved her glass and then moved herself. And the sound of the chair legs on the hardwood was, in the silence, extraordinarily clear. My mother watched it happen. I watched my mother watch it happen. She looked, in that moment, like someone who had been handed a mirror and could not recognize the reflection. I didn't feel triumph. I want to be clear about that. I didn't feel the satisfaction of a years-long score being settled. What I felt was something more like grief. The specific, quiet grief of understanding that a relationship you'd spent 31 years hoping could become something different was exactly as broken as you'd feared. But there was also something else. Something clean. I pushed my chair back from the round table in the corner. I stood up. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair and folded it over my arm. I didn't rush. I didn't perform. I simply stood. I came tonight because Becca asked me to, I said. My voice was level. I made sure of that. Because she's my sister, and I love her, and I wanted to be here for this. I looked at Becca. She was crying. Not dramatically. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when something has broken through. I love you, Becca. I mean that. Then I looked at my mother. I don't know if you're proud of me. I don't know if you've ever been proud of me. I stopped needing that to be true a long time ago. I paused. But I need you to understand something. What I built it in spite of this, not because of it. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I'm not disappearing, I said. I'm not cutting you off. I'm not making a scene. I put my jacket on. But I'm not sitting at this table for another hour. I turned to Carol. Thank you, I said. Not for the company information. For being curious. For asking. Carol held my gaze. She nodded once. It was a complete whole nod. The kind that carries everything it needs to without words. I turned and walked out of the private room, through the main dining room, past the hostess stand, and out through the front door of Carver's into the October night. The air outside was cold and clear. I stood in the parking lot for a moment and breathed it. My car was 40 feet away. I walked to it. I sat in it. I did not drive for 8 minutes. Then I drove home. The calls started at 11 that night. Becca first, and 2 numbers I didn't recognize. Then my mother at 11:51, which I let go to voicemail. I didn't listen to the voicemail until the next morning. My mother sounded like someone who had rehearsed the message several times and was still not satisfied with the draft. She said she was upset. She said things had gotten out of hand. She said she would appreciate a call when I had a moment. She did not say she was sorry. I called Becca back on Sunday morning. We talked for 2 hours. She told me what happened after I left. The chair moving, the Harrisons leaving, Carol's quiet and specific conversation with Tyler that Becca was not party to, but could see happening from across the room. She told me that my father had not said a word for the rest of the dinner, which was apparently so uncharacteristic that multiple people mentioned it afterward. She told me Tyler had driven home with his mother that night and had called Becca from his car when he got there. He had said, with the care of someone choosing words deliberately, I need to understand your family better before we set a date. He had been gentle about it. He had not been unclear. Becca cried when she told me that part. She was not crying because she was angry. She was crying because she understood it. He's right, she said. He saw everything. He doesn't know if that's what he's marrying into. I asked her what she was thinking. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I've been watching what they do to you my whole life, and I've spent 30 years calling it normal, and it's not. It was never normal. I didn't say anything. I let that sit. I'm sorry, she said. I know that's late. I know it doesn't fix anything. It helps, I said, and I meant that too. Carol called my business line on Monday. We talked for 45 minutes. She was direct, asked good questions, and had clearly done more research on Callaway Cleaning Solutions than just the business first item and the magazine feature. She knew our franchise structure, our geographic distribution, our service model. Then she asked if I had ever considered a commercial real estate consulting partnership for our property adjacent services. I had, as a matter of fact. Then we should have a more formal conversation, Carol said. We scheduled it for the following Thursday. I don't say this to wrap a bow on the story. Business outcomes are not the point of this story. The point is what happened in the parking lot of a steakhouse in Delwood, Ohio, 3 weeks after the dinner, when I met my mother for coffee because Becca had asked us both to try. My mother arrived looking like herself. Pressed clothes, careful makeup, the composed presentation she brought to everything. We ordered coffee. We sat across a small table in the window of the diner on Main Street, where we had sat dozens of times over 30 years. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I didn't know. I know, I said. You never told us. You never asked. She looked at her coffee. I should have asked. 3 words. That was all she said. I should have asked. It was not an apology. It was not the full accounting of everything that had accumulated. It was not the conversation I used to want. The one where she looked at all of it clearly and named it and understood the cost. But it was something she had never said before, and she said it without conditions. I drove home that afternoon and sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, and thought about what I wanted from what came next. I thought about the business I had built without their knowledge. I thought about Patricia Donovan, the first client, the woman who cried quietly in her kitchen when I returned it to her. I thought about Carla, who bought her house. I thought about Dana, who saw what we were building before I fully believed it myself. I thought about Carol Hargrove, who read a business journal article about a cleaning company founder and remembered her name. The simple, radical act of being curious about someone whose family had decided wasn't worth tracking. My name is Renee Calloway. I started with a bucket, a sponge, and a $400 savings account, and a family that had already decided what I would and wouldn't become. I built something that spoke for itself, even on the nights no one was listening.